Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Evermore podcast, Newcastle United podcast on the Evermore YouTube channel, as it's changed now. So we're back with another special, one of our specials we've really been looking forward to, mate. It's been very topical at the moment, Mark, hasn't it? And it's all about Eddie Howe and the transition and just basically how he changed United, as we said in the intro for the video there. And it's been fantastic, mate, hasn't it, to watch what Eddie Howe's done with this club.
Yeah, it has. I know we're going to touch on this in a second, but when you look at the way that things started this season, the change has been phenomenal, and just the way that he's gone about things. So it's been, many scoffed at him being appointed. Then they're not laughing now, really, are they?
Absolutely, especially his predecessor, who said the fella who got Bournemouth relegated, which won't be the first or last time we mention that in this episode, mate. But just before we get stuck in, a little bit of housekeeping, guys. If you're tuning to us for the first time, please consider subscribing. Like and subscribe. We're looking to try and break the 300 subscriber mark. Would love it if you can do it as well. We're really happy to do this special. Really proud that Mark's putting loads of graph for the slides, which you'll see in a minute, and we're going to get stuck right into it, mate. But just before we talk about where we are now, Mark, it's important to remember kind of where we were. We started the season, Newcastle United fans with Steve Bruce still in charge after a very unhappy, toxic season the season before. Yes, we had a nice run towards the end. Joe Willock basically saved his job, let's be honest with you. Mike Ashley was still a manager. Takeover was rumbling on the background, but it seemed to stall. Nothing seemed to be happening really. And going back to the start of it, Steve Bruce was just being his usual Steve Bruce self, rubbing the fans up the wrong way. Just everything he said just pissed everybody off. But the fixture list was relatively kind, mate, to start with us, wasn't it? We kind of drew teams in and around us where we would be looking to finish, where we finished the season before, and it just didn't quite go to plan for old Brucey, did it?
No, you're absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. When you look at that run of fixes, you're looking at the likes of Villa, Southampton, Leeds, Watford, Wolves, Palace, Brighton. They're all games that, when you consider how well you'd done at the end of the previous season, you would be hoping to pick up plenty of points against those sides, and it really just never happened, did it? And there was no sign of life at all.
No, there wasn't. I mean, there were some times that we started games well. I mean, the West Ham game, I think we went in front with the Callum Wilson goal. He picked up where he left off and looked sharp, looked lively. He was wearing the number 9 shirt. We were all buzzing for that. And then it just drifted away, beaten comfortably 4-2. Villa dispensed of us with ease, really 2-0. Southampton was 2s each. We needed Maxi to save us. Manchester United, the return of Ronaldo, pasted. And then obviously Leeds was a draw. Watford a draw. Wolves beating us. Spurs again. Spurs was the turning of the tide, wasn't it, really? I was at that game. I was in the Gallagher end on a stag do that was rearranged, and I do remember it. It was the first game after the takeover had gone through, which was a sizable change, which really kickstarted everything, and obviously kickstarted Eddie Howe coming to the club. But we went into that game with Steve Bruce again. We went in front. Wilson, the place went crazy. Kind of the atmosphere that you used to enjoy now under the current manager. And then obviously we ended up getting beat 3-2, and it was so toxic at the end, Mark. And it was pretty clear that Bruce's time was up then, wasn't it? I think after that game.
I think the owners tried to do the best of both things at that point, hadn't they? I mean, we've touched on this before, where the right thing to have done for the club would have been to get rid of Bruce at that point when they took over. I don't know whether sentiment drifted into it, with it being his 1,000th game, in management, and they thought, well, we'll give you that and then we'll move you on.
And he's quite well liked in the game, isn't he? So maybe they didn't want to ruffle people's feathers, because there was a lot of controversy about the takeover anyway, in terms of the money and all that stuff.
I think that might be right. Not ruffling too many feathers, but I think you always felt that if things didn't go well, that obviously the mood in Newcastle at that time was phenomenal. And it had been this wave of joy over the previous week. And then when Newcastle scored, it was, I mean, the roof came off. The noise was incredible. But you always felt that if things went badly, that, the mood would turn. It wouldn't turn against the club now, because there was nowhere to aim it to other than directly at Bruce. And I felt that it was almost unfair on him, because you were putting him in the position where he just couldn't win. If they won, it was going to be because of the club was on a high. If they lost, it was all going to be down to him because Ashley had gone. So it was an odd decision. I went back and forwards with that. I wasn't sure whether why they'd done it or what the benefit would have been from it, but the mood had definitely changed. I mean, that would have been an absolutely awful atmosphere had nothing, the takeover not have happened. But you could see it once it started going the wrong way. That anger was there, just directed at Bruce.
Absolutely, and I think at that point Bruce had become a hate figure. Really, he becomes somebody that you attached with the Mike Ashley regime, and he wasn't the only Mike Ashley manager, but he was quintessentially the personification of mediocrity. I think is probably the right way to describe it. And you just looked at him and thought, this is exactly what's wrong with the club. This is where we don't want to be. We've got these new owners. The future's bright. This is this horrible door stop in the way of the door being flung open to the future. So I think it was only right really that he went. Obviously, there's a lot of names linked with the job. Fonseca, Lucien Favre, Unai Emery looked like it was going to happen for a long time. And it was obviously played out in the media. Sounded like he accepted the job, and obviously he changed his mind, went to the state of Villarreal. Sorry, but in amongst all of that, Eddie Howe was a name that was always linked. And even under Ashley was linked as well when the tide was turning against Bruce. And, there was talk that he interviewed very well. He pitched himself and he pitched his plan, expertly. And obviously what we've come to know about Eddie, in the last few months, it doesn't surprise anybody really, does it, that he probably was the best prepared manager, I imagine, in an interview.
I'd imagine at any interview stage that Eddie Howe would be the best prepared of anybody that turns up, regardless of whether he's the best man for the job. He just has that about him, doesn't he? I think he prepares to the nth degree. So he's just got that about him and will come across very, very well.
Absolutely. So obviously he did get the job. He came in. He was in the stands against Brighton, obviously for Graham Jones, who was his last interim manager position in charge. Still stayed obviously on the coaching team after Eddie came in. Got a good 1-1 draw, to be fair. But Eddie, being Eddie, would have assessed those players, in the stand. And then he was looking forward to get stuck in. It was first game against Brentford, but COVID robbed him of that pleasure, sadly. And he had to watch it from his hotel room. And it was an unbelievable 3-3 draw all over the place we were. But you could almost... It's funny because we didn't really get the quintessential new manager bounce like Villa got it with Gerrard. Dean Smith had a bit of it at Norwich. We didn't seem to win games, but you could see early on, Mark, couldn't you, that there was tangible changes in the way the players were playing, in terms of how they were expressing their movement, the pressures and everything, mate, wasn't it? It looked different, didn't it?
It was an attitude. It was a we believe in what the manager's doing, rather than the physical, the tactics around it. That sometimes you can see quite. I think first and foremost, it came down to fitness. You saw pretty quickly the change in training philosophy between the two managers, because one didn't believe in it and the other one is very much so.
One did and one gave them days off, clearly, is it?
Yeah, this is it. It's what one supposedly believes in fitness management but never trains his players, and the other one came in and ran them into the ground, and it showed very quickly that the change. You
saw the video, with the whistle and the way he was talking, getting the ball,
it's just a different way of doing it. And like I said, the change in the players was pretty quick, and I guess you didn't get that manager bounce where you won a few games, but when you consider you'd only got 5 points in the first 11 games, you then went on and got 5 points from the next 4, which included a first win of the season. So the sort of the seeds of change were there, weren't they? That Newcastle had got that, or we've got a little bit of hope now. We've got something to cling on to, because it looked desperate for the first 11 games.
It did. I mean, going out in the cup to Cambridge didn't help either. I'm sure that wasn't part of Eddie's plan. But obviously Kieran Trippier making his debut, we were all really excited about bringing those players in, So, but just rewinding a little bit, obviously, to some of those games, we got that first win against Burnley. I think we probably would have beaten Norwich if it hadn't been for Kieran Clark's stupid red card. But that game will always be remembered for the transformative game. And we have to say this. I know we've covered this already on the channel in our Joe Linton video, but that was the game where Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall said to Joe Linton, "Hey, Joe, drop back 15 yards and be a midfielder for a bit, will you?" And that to me, and I said this when we did the Joe Linton one, it just showed you how intuitive this man is to these players and what they can and can't do. Rewind to the previous manager who said, these players can only play a certain way. They can't do this. They can't play in a back four. They can't do this. Everything was they can't, they won't, there's no way. And then you look at what Eddie Howe did by moving Joe Linton back, and he was unbelievable in that game. When in that midfield berth, he just looked a completely different player. And then you move on to the Burnley game where we get the win. Wilson scores an absolute belter of a goal, and then the momentum starts to build, doesn't it? And the belief starts to build, as you say, mate. And that was almost that win. We needed that win so much, and it was almost like a release valve had been turned at St James's Park, and that pressure had come out a little bit.
It was absolutely right. That's a key point. Pressure. I think you then, and we said it at the time. You wanted that sort of period in December then from the Burnley game to not lose touch, and although your next 3 games were all defeats. You're playing Leicester, Liverpool, and Manchester City. So there are 3 games that you look at and go, that's a really, really tough gig. And in another time, that Manchester United game being the 4th of those games was possibly another one. But you could see bits, you could see ways that the club was changing at that point, and it kind of came to a head then, didn't it, in the Manchester United game, and that performance on that night where realistically Newcastle should have won it. They played very, very well, and only by not taking chances really it cost them the game. And that game was really the real kind of coming to fruition of that change in Joe Linton as well, because that night he was on another level in that midfield position. He was sensational.
He was, and he's never looked back, to be fair. We've all been waiting for that to run out, and it still hasn't. So thank God, and let's hope it continues so long. So obviously from that, like you say, the conference was there. We were playing better stuff. We had a tough December, got into the January window. Now, the January window is an interesting one because a lot of salty fans of other clubs are throwing the January transfer window at Newcastle and Eddie Howe, almost stripping the man of credit to say that, of course, he kept them up. Of course, he's got them out of relegation. He spent £90 million in January, but teams spend money all of the time, and they have to spend money to move or to progress. Whether it's to try and get in the top 4, like Manchester United spent 120 million and got less points than Newcastle did, I think, in 2022. So Newcastle was massively in need of surgery, Mark, wasn't it? Because it was so off balance, which we've got a great slide, in a few moments there to go through, but it was so off balance, off kilter in terms of the squad, depth, in terms of the quality of the players, what they were bringing, how they were being played. And, Eddie had to buy, didn't he? He had to buy in January, mate. That was key.
There had to be fresh faces that came in. There had to be quality that came into the squad because there was just so little of it. And players that just had lost their belief in their own ability. And that's one of the key things that we've seen changing. You come back to those salty comments about, Newcastle are only safe because they spent 90 million. Well, yeah, that's great. But they didn't buy a brand new Fabian Schär in January. They didn't buy a Matty Target. They got him in on loan. They didn't buy a new Emil Kraft. He's been coached up and has looked very, very good at right back. It's a different player. Yeah. Jonjo Shelvey is another one who has played far better under Howe. He's not perfect. He still had those moments, but he looks far more accomplished in that centre midfield
and fitter by a long way than he used to.
And even to the point where we've said, do you know what? Actually, when he's not played, really missed him. We could have done, or Newcastle could have done with him in that midfield, tonight or today. And then obviously Joe Linton as well has been a key one. Even Joe Willock looked to start to get back to somewhere near the form that he'd shown previously. He might not have scored the goals, but he was making those runs that he'd been making before. He looked happier. And that's a huge thing for those players, is they just look happier playing football again.
Yeah, I think Eddie Howe actually made Joe Willock a better all-around player. I think when he first came, he was a goal-scoring midfielder. And to be fair, his goal-scoring record was incredible, really. But in terms of his helping out with the team, he probably wasn't as an all-around player as he is under Eddie Howe. But going back to some of the players you're talking about there as well, I mean, these sort of comments from the fans, or the fans of other clubs, this club was starved and totally underfunded for years. People talk about, you signed Callum Wilson, he's never fit. Eddie Howe's had to, have most of these games without Callum Wilson, who's our main striker, who's our main goal scorer. So Maximin, his fitness is up and down. So these players that were signed previously in the Ashley regime, they haven't been mainstay players. The two marquee players that were signed in January were Kieran Trippier, injured, knacked his foot, out for most of the time. Eddie Howe's great man management got Emil Kraft to step it up a level, and we haven't missed Trippier, which just tells you everything about what he's done with his team. Credit to Kieran Trippier. They all said he was here for the money. Look what he's done. Look, he's in every team photo. He's traveling to games on crutches, and he's getting disrespect, from, these Talksport shithouses like Gabriel Bonglahor and guys like that, because he's doing that, because they know they're completely wrong and they've misread the guy's character. And character is a key word. We haven't just signed quality, we've signed the right characters.
Yeah.
Bruno Guimaraes, hands down, the star player, right? Talk about character. Eddie Howe's managed him superbly. He's kept him on the sidelines, slowly bled him into the Premier League, bled him into a new way of playing, a new different culture, just see what other guys are doing in the league, check it all out, feel it all out a little bit. I'll bring you in little bits. And then when he was ready, bang, Bruno was a mainstay in the team. And now he's the first name in the team sheet and he's undroppable, isn't he, mate?
Yeah, and would probably walk his way into most of the Premier League sides now
100%.
Because he's been brilliant. And I think Eddie Howe managed that perfectly. I know he was getting some grief early on with not playing.
Pressure, probably more pressure from the fans to get him in, I think.
Yeah. But when we talked this a couple of minutes ago, it comes down to plan. And this was his plan. He knew that probably throwing him into the Premier League from day one was not the right way to do it. It's a different level to Ligue 1. It's a different tempo.
Pace.
There's a different style of play. So let's get him in gently, let him find his feet, and then unleash him. And he's been unreal since he's made his sort of break into the first team now.
Absolutely, an unbelievable player, and the respect he's got for the manager. That's a key thing. They've all got such respect for the manager, and you still, you had Fraser here and Wilson here, worked with him before, and look at Fraser. Look what's got out of Fraser. I mean, Ryan Fraser was dead and buried in many Newcastle fans' eyes that, he's not done nothing. Some people called him the ghost numerous times because he just kept disappearing, But one of the most impressive players for me, and again, it was one of them players that other people scoffed at, underrated, or what they're signing him for. He's Brighton's third choice centre-half or whatever. He's crap. Dan Burn is for 13 million quid for a guy who can defend as well as that, and not just defend as well as that, but bring the ball out well, read the game, his touch, his leadership abilities. We've got an absolute steal on our hands, and credit Eddie Howe for identifying that player. I'm sure, because we haven't got the technical director at the club to find those players. Eddie Howe has been watching that guy, and he knows that guy was going to bring him that at the back, wasn't he?
The key thing you said there, leadership, and that was something that Newcastle didn't have. And in really most of those players that came in Trippier, Burn, Guimaraes, Chris Wood, they've got leadership.
He might target
to a point. I think sort of when you look at his time at Villa, he was very quiet, but he will muck in. He's quite happy to just do the dirty work. So in 4 of those 5, you've got proper captain material, and there was so little of it previously that everybody kind of taken their foot off, and even the players that had not shown that before have started to show that again. Like I say, we'll go back to Fabian Shaw. He's shown that he's willing to do it all, and if you rewind to the end of Bruce in that, Fabian Schär's not getting a new contract. He's not going to be at the club any longer.
Yeah.
And now he's signed a new deal. You know, he's got another couple of years where, you know, he can continue to play, hopefully in the form that he's shown since Eddie Howe took over, and he's been a big part of that back four and a reason why Newcastle have done so well.
I'm just so glad that we didn't lose him like we did Florian Lejeune. You know, it would have been interesting to see what Eddie Howe would have done with Florian Lejeune, because he was a brilliant defender and very, very good on the ball, and I'm sure he would have fit into this mould, you know, superbly well. But, you know, obviously Dan Burn has just been amazing, to be fair. So yeah, I mean, that's something that the other fans, you know, throw at us now. I just think it's desperation, really, because they can't give the man credit. But something else to give him credit for, the trip over to Dubai, I think it was great for the team bond, and I think bleeding in those new players as well to the squad. I think the togetherness and everything else, I think it was a really, really good idea. Yes, there was an element of commercialism in there as well, you know, because of obviously the ownership and everything else. But yeah, I just think, yeah, it was a great. So it was Saudi that was the first one, wasn't it? Sorry, Saudi was the first trip, beg your pardon. Dubai was the second, sorry. So I think, yeah, the Saudi trip was great, I think, for that as a team. Yes, the owners probably wanted them to go there and stuff as well, but they came back and it just seemed to galvanise the squad, didn't it? And they went on this run, and the results were just brilliant.
Yeah, and sometimes that's what it is. Excuse me, but it's about team bonding, and you've shown that every game now. The photographs that come out, and it's.
I love the team photos.
It's cheesy. It is a team united, it's a club united. Whether it's owners, fans, players, everybody is as one now. Whereas before it was so disjointed. And those trips, yes, there is that commercial element to it. There's always going to be. You don't do anything for free. You don't do anything to not get something out of it like that. But for Howe, it was mainly a chance of let's get everybody together. Let's continue to build on the good work we've done in training, but give people a little bit of a bonus for having done it. Let's take them somewhere that's a little bit warmer in the winter. Give them something else and train in a different environment as well. And it just paid huge dividends for them.
It is. I mean, and there's something else as well. You know, the belief, the kind of calmness, the coolness, the classiness of Eddie Howe. You know, you don't believe this man wasn't going to get us out of it. There was times when we were worried about it, and we were thinking, you know, if he doesn't, it's not his fault. You know, next season he'll get us up and all this kind of stuff. But he galvanized the fans, and he won the trust of the fans quite quickly, I think. There was some doubters, you know, and I think until we kind of, I think Lee said on Evermore, I think until we got that result against Leeds, there was some that were doubting him. But after that result against Leeds, they came on board. But a huge thing that he's also helped, I think, and the takeover has massively helped, is the return of war flags, the atmosphere in the ground. It's just electric, you know. And you know, I think even Saint-Maximin said in a recent interview, who wouldn't want to play here? You know, and when you look at that atmosphere, you know, we're rising up the league, you know, as the chant goes, E-I-E-I-O, up the Premier League we go. You know, we're sitting 10th at the moment, which is just, I mean, 10th, we were 19th when this man took over, Mark. Before we look at the proof in the pudding as to how he's improved us and where he's improved us, I mean, just that in itself, 19th when he took over, 10th as we sit and record this today, that is sensational, mate, isn't it?
It is. I mean, ASM's right. Who wouldn't want to play at St James in front of that atmosphere? And it is very telling that now, even when things don't go quite so right, there's no negativity. There's always a belief that Newcastle can do something. Even when you look at the Liverpool game, you know, it wasn't brilliant, but Newcastle hung in, and at times they probably would have folded much earlier. You know, Dubravka's had a blinder, but there was still the belief that, you know what, we might just get something out of this. Whereas before it was, once a goal went in, it was, well, we can't get back now. That's it, done. Because the whole game plan was to not concede, and we'll try and nick something. So it's just a complete change of mentality throughout the club. There is belief now that even with the players that are there, that something can happen.
Absolutely. I love watching his press conferences as well. He's just such a class act. If you compare him to some of the stuff Bruce used to come out with towards the end of his time. I mean, I've never seen a manager just more chaotic, more just antagonistic. moody, immature, childish. I'm thinking this is a guy who's got 1,000 games, as you rightly said before, Mark. This is a guy who's been in the game, 40 odd years or something, 50 odd years, 60 odd years. And you think, why are you behaving this way? From minute one, Eddie Howe was throwing difficult questions about, the geopolitical issues with Saudi Arabia, handled it just with absolute aplomb and eloquence and class. And everything he gets thrown at him, he just bats it back with a smile. It is, his charming little, charismatic smile that he does and all this. It doesn't faze him. He's just such a class act. And he's every day for me the modern day manager that this club needs for this evolutionary stage, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I said very early on that when he was being talked about, he was the right man for the job now. I still think when you look in a couple of years' time, he might not be the right man to take the next step. If Possibly he is, brilliant. But he was the right man to come in and right the ship and start to put things back the way that they should be. Newcastle is a big club. Yes, they're not in the upper echelons of the Premier League level in terms of being that size, and their history isn't particularly brilliant. But they are a big club. They're not the biggest. They haven't won much. But it's potential, and there is massive potential. There always was massive potential. There's a huge fan base. There is a loyal fan base, and they will support you through thick and thin, no matter, if you put in a performance, that those fans will support you. And the trouble before was that you didn't have a manager to believe in, but you didn't have a manager that believed in you. It was just an owner that didn't believe in it either. So to bring Howe in, to bring that, and I've said it about 1,000 times already this episode, belief. It's all about believing that you can actually do the job. You train, bring the fitness back into the squad, put your own game plan into things. But just believe that you can go out and compete with whoever's in front of you.
Absolutely, pride in what you do. The blue tick man Dan. Dan Wales, one of our very own Dan of Evermore. He asked Steve Bruce himself on the radio in Newcastle once, "Why did you keep dumbing our team down and bigging other teams up?" And he went, "Oh, I didn't know I did that." And you thought, "Fuck, of course you do that. You do it every single game." But you don't get that already. How he respects the team that he's playing against, and he says, "We need to be at our best. We need to show up, and we need to stick to the plan." And everything he says is all about, we'll respect them, but we need to concentrate on what we're doing and do what we can do. And as a player, that's got to inspire confidence massively. But we've spoken about it, Mark. Let's look at some of the stats here. Let's look at some of the evidence of what Eddie's done. You've bashed some great slides together, mate, which just shows you the proof in the pudding of what an amazing job Eddie Howe has done, mate.
Yeah, so I mean, the first we'll kind of touch on is just where the action takes place on the field, and you look at the top sort of section. This is the 11 games prior to Howe taking over, and where the majority of the game was played. So you've got that sort of 32% of the game is played in the defensive third, 43.91 in the midfield third, and 24.18 in the attacking third. And the change between then and under Howe is that you can see that there's less time being spent in the defensive third and the midfield third, although barely, and more time being spent in the opposition half. And that's all about that. Let's put pressure on the opposition. Let's get further up the field away from our goal, because we want to spend more of our time, maybe it's not attacking, but keeping the ball away from the opposition, keeping them pressured, make them make mistakes and give us the ball back. Let's do that further up the field. And it's, again, that was one of the one key change, that you can see is just evidenced by that. And we'll come onto the pressure sort of stats and things, but just that evidence of where that's happening on the field.
100%, and you can visually see that as well. I mean, any Newcastle fan can visually see, whether you're in the ground or watching the TV. Even neutrals can see that now, that they've watched us, for a handful of games, because it wasn't just one game; it was 2, 3, 4, 5. You look at us now; we are a much higher pressing side. We don't give teams time on the ball. Even that midfield area, as you rightly say, although the there's still a lot of action in there. It's pressure. It's Joe Linton, it's Joe Willock, it's Shelvey, it's Bruno, pushing players, pushing them down, getting the ball, moving it around, making things happen as well. And then obviously further up the field, ASM is running and pressing. It's not really his game. It'd be interesting to see the long-term plan for ASM, but he is pressing at the moment. He's doing what the manager says. And it's great to see, mate. But as you say, let's have a look at some of those pressure stats. Some of that more detailed changes in the side there. This is a fantastic slide you've got here, mate.
Yeah, so with this one, it's kind of an overall view. You've got the game stats on the left there, so you can see that the number of points per game has gone up massively. Goals scored is up. Goals against is obviously down massively. When you 2.18 per game in the first 11 games, 1.33 goals conceded in the last 24. XG is higher. XG against is lower again, and those are all marked improvements on where you've been. Number of shots is up. Number of shots on target is up. So in the attacking third, things are getting much better under Howe. In terms of possession, obviously possession has been up. It doesn't look an awful lot, but 2% when you consider where you've been is a huge sort of number. It's a huge change. The key stat from that possession sort of thing I look at is the number of games where you've had 50% possession or more as well. You've only had one game in those first 11, whereas there are now 7 of the last 24. So nearly a third of the games you've spent with more of the ball. Number of passes are up. The number of passes completed are up. It's all about keeping the ball, like I said, away from the opposition. In those numbers in the middle there in that graphic is all about the types of passes. So short passing attempts is up. These aren't huge changes. Medium passes attempts are up quite a bit, and the long balls are down. And again, I think that just shows a change in the mentality of the squad. Is it's not just lump it and hope for something. Yes, the changes aren't massive, but they all make such a difference to the way that Newcastle have played. And then the defensive side of things, your tackles are down and your tackles won are down, but you would expect that. That almost looked, that's a strange one, but you'd expect that if you are having more of the ball and doing more with possession, you would expect to have that stat because you're not going to have to put yourself in a position where you are making more tackles. But then the key defensive stat is the pressures. The number of pressures per game is up. The number of pressures won is up. And then focus on where those changes happen. So the number of pressures in the defensive third have come down, and they are up much more in the midfield and especially in that attacking third of the field. So you can really see where the focus of Eddie Howe's game plan is let's get our players further up the field, pressurising the opposition, and let's win the ball back in a place that is far less dangerous to us and far more so for them. And it's, we touched on the change in Joe Linton. He's almost been the forefront of that because he's been that player that has driven the pressure on the opposition in the other half.
Absolutely, it's amazing because I've heard Eddie Howe say this a few times that we need to be better with the ball, but we've been really good off the ball. And I think that slide there 100% shows that the pressures. We hunt down in packs. I've heard Gary Neville say that on Sky before when he's criticising Manchester United and he's praising other teams. Because he can see that as a football man and he knows exactly what Eddie Howe is doing with that side. And it is amazing to see Joe Linton is definitely, setting the tone. We never thought we'd say that, 18 months ago, bloody hell, under the dark days of Steve Bruce. But it just goes to show you what the fresh change in mentality can do for a player or players in this case. Sean Longstaff, even though he's not really been in the team a lot, the way he waxes lyrically about this manager, getting him back on track, because that was another player who suffered under Steve Bruce's weak management, much like his little brother as well. So Eddie Howe isn't just helping in terms of bringing the new ethos and buying new players. As you rightly said, it's the players that were already here. I heard him say the other day that because everyone keeps talking about the signings, going back to that, next BT and Talksport and all these guys. And I think it was BT had said it to him, and he said they blended really well with what we have already. And I thought that's a really good bit of management as well there. That classiness, that articulation to say, you know what, I'm not going to go, yeah, Bruno's amazing, because he knows he's a good player. But he's going to say, look, Shelby's been brilliant, Willock's been brilliant, because those lads have put in the graft and they have improved their game. But looking at that, it's interesting because, there's no doubt there will be additional quality added in the summer. We'll talk about that right through the summer and ever more. So again, guys, stay tuned to the channel. Make sure you click subscribe, because we'll be talking about new players coming in, I'm sure, right through the summer, because we've got a stupid World Cup in the winter now. So we've got plenty to talk about, mate. But, I think that he's not gonna just throw these players on the scrap heap who have put it in for him, and really stepped up their game. I mean, John Joe Shelby, like you said before, mate, it's been a revelation. It just, he is the conundrum, isn't he? Rafa got a bit out of him, and then he drifted off again, and Rafa was going to get rid of him, didn't he? But Eddie Howe just seems to have John Joe at a level now where he contributes, which is amazing to see, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads in actually a point in which where the sides and the focus of play as well. So we've looked at which third of the field it's happening, but also
the shape of the side,
changing where it happens as well. And you can see the vast majority of the focus of sort of attacking play is down the left hand side, and you really expect that to be the case with saint-maximin playing mostly down that side, and now the introduction of Matty Target there as well. So that in particular hasn't changed, but the focus from the other side, I think that might have been slightly different had Trippier been available.
Would have been a bit higher, though.
Yeah, potentially, but there is a little bit more of an equality across that side by bringing more focus of play through the middle and allowing the likes of Bruno and Shelby to have a little bit more say on the way that the game is going. And again, when you look at sort of an average position, now this is what I put together. It was it's not going to be 100% accurate. I tried to go through the games, each of the games, and sort of average the position of players. The numbers represent the players that played in and around that area the most. So there will be little sort of quirks in that, and players that maybe haven't played particularly in a position right the way through, but for the period of time that it refers to, have played time in that position, and where that play, or where there was a player that sort of was in that area. So you the first thing that jumps out to me from that is you look at the Eddie Howe formations in both home and away, and they're very structured. There's a very definitive way of
shape
playing
to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at that, and I'm almost looking at it as from, you look at some of the formations that you get from Football Manager, and you go, yeah, I can see that. And that almost, I wouldn't say haphazard way that you look at the way that Newcastle was set up before. It was very, very much three at the back. It was very much playing with high sort of wing backs, but then at home with your right centre back, who in this graphic is shown as Kraft, but was also the likes of Hayden at one point. I think Lascelles spent time there. Shaw played there. So again, this is not just one player. It does cover everybody who played in that position and where the vast majority of time was spent. He's right behind your right your right wing back. It's a strange way of setting up, and you can obviously the other side. You can see how far up Matt Ritchie was, and we've touched on this before, where Matt Ritchie just doesn't have the legs to be able to patrol up and down that left hand side all the time. You've got a much more balanced left back now in Matt Target, who can do that job and get up and down and support saint-maximin, but he's also getting a little bit more support in and around the area, not just from saint-maximin, but also from the likes of Joe Linton, who can move left. You've got Chris Wood, who's moved slightly left as well, and that's, I think, where he pulls to try and sort of create a little bit more space for everybody else. Like I say, you've got a much more structured midfield So you can see where Joe Linton's played. You can see where Shelvey spent the majority of the time. And now you can start to see the progression of Guimaraes, where he's starting to push further forward into the opponent's half. Whereas sort of before, you looked at that right-hand side of the midfield 2 or 3, and they're behind the halfway line or just on the halfway line. And there's very little support to those forward players.
The one thing that scared the life out of me there was how deep Hayden was on top of Lascelles. You know, you just don't have that with an Eddie Howe formation now. You've got Cher, who's just stepping a little bit further out from Dan Burn. You know, you've got Emil Kraft and Matty Target in good wide positions. And then you've got the wingers either side. I mean, obviously Saint-Maximin's a bit of a loose cannon, but, you know, Fraser can drop back in. Shelvey can drop back in. As you rightly said, Marcus, there's just more shape, there's more balance, but also there's more energy, there's more legs to the team. You know, guys can get back and defend, and they do in numbers. I watched John Joe Shelvey burst his lung to rush the keeper at the weekend. He was fucked afterwards for about 20 minutes.
Such a strange thing to say.
It was so weird, but he was knackered for about 20 minutes afterwards. But you never saw that under Steve.
No,
Shelvey
I mean, you talk about Ryan Fraser. Well, the work rate Ryan Fraser has when he plays down that right-hand side has been unbelievable. And he played a couple of games, I think, where he played more left side before, and there just wasn't the willingness to sort of really track or really put that sort of amount of effort in it. And it comes down to the way that you're set up by the manager and the way you believe in what's going on. He's been phenomenal when he's come in. Murphy as well, when he's played down that sort of right-hand side, the amount of work that he's put in, and he was another player that was really hit or miss and had people ready to write him off completely. And again, he's just showed another level to his style of play, just his commitment in that regard, his willingness to get involved both going forward and coming back to help out.
I think it's an understanding that Eddie Howe has about these players. And, you know, he would have read up on these players. He would have watched these players. He would have had a dossier compiled on these players in all the games that he would have watched probably under Bruce, under Rafa, you know, so he can go and pull Fabian Schär to one side and say, you know, I don't want you, you know, playing that way. I want you to get on the ball. I want you to bring it out from the back. And he'd be saying to John Joe Shelvey, you don't get in his way. You move to the side or you push up. He'll be saying to Joe Willock, you need to press, you need to hit. He just seems to understand what strength those players have and how to get the best out of them, you know. And, you know, the fitness is massive as well. I mean, visually you can see, you know, Joe Linton's physique has changed. Ryan Fraser's physique has changed. You know, they look fitter, they look leaner, they look stronger. You know, and that's why we're hanging games. I mean, the Leeds game was a good point in question against Bielsa's Leeds. We wouldn't have even been in that game still physically fit wise if Eddie Howe hadn't been in charge, because with Steve Bruce we come storming out first 15 minutes, kitchen sink at it, and then the players were just blowing their asses out, and then we'll get turned over, you know, by high pressing teams and counter attacking teams like Leeds. But under Howe we don't do that, you know, and under Liverpool at the weekend we didn't do that. So you can see that progressive growth right in front of your eyes, mate. It's great to see.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious game you go back to is the Chelsea one, where 60 minutes in it was close, but then the legs went, and Chelsea could step up a level, whereas Newcastle had been at their peak. Then you come into the Chelsea game, at Stamford Bridge, and it was Newcastle that had the legs. It was Newcastle that, I mean, they were robbed, massively robbed. This, from a neutral perspective, they were robbed. There's no other way to say it. And you just saw the difference in the way then between those two games against the same club. Just the total attitude change and the total fitness change in the players, and that's key. It's massive, you know, to the way it's been. They hung in against Liverpool at the weekend. It was always going to be tough. You know, Liverpool are a fantastic club. As much as everybody, you know, doesn't, you know, there isn't a Liverpool fan likes to say, you know, we don't like them, but they're an amazing club under Klopp, and their levels of fitness are incredible. You've only got to look at the likes of Milner and Henderson to see how much work they put into the game. But Newcastle hung with them, and you go back 6 or 7 months, and that just wouldn't have happened.
Absolutely, you know, and it's been brilliant to talk about, you know, what Eddie Howe's done here, mate. You know, whether you say he's manager of the season or not, I know you're a big advocate for that. I think he's got to be in the conversation. There's no question about that. To take a team from being dead and buried 19th, and amassing 38 points, it's just incredible, from where we were to where we are now. Wherever we finish, no matter what, it's been a successful turn for Eddie Howe as Newcastle manager in his first kind of 75% of the season, so to speak. And it'd be interesting, mate. So not to talk about what kind of additions we'll bring in, because we'll be all over that this summer forevermore. But a couple of new additions into that squad, mate. What kind of side do you see Newcastle being next season? More of the same, high press, win the ball back, retain possession a bit more? How do you see us playing?
Yeah, I think the die has been cast really in that. I think he set his stall out, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to win the battle. He wants to play, more attacking football. He wants to be a little bit more, confident with the ball, a little bit more. Let's go out and give it a go. And it was always something we screamed at under Bruce, is just give it a go, not just
try.
Not just try and hang in there and try and nick something on a break. Let's actually just go out and compete. I'm sort of with agreement with some of the ever more guys that I think you've got to be looking at sort of 8th and up from next season with the right additions. You play in this way of win the ball back. Let's use the high press, the Klopp almost style of play, where you are pressurising the opposition at every given opportunity. Win the ball back, and then you're on to a winner, because if you're winning the ball back quickly, you're in the right areas to do it, and then you can pile players into those key areas going forward. If you're sitting back and allowing players to attack you, if you win the ball back, then you've got an entire field to get across before you can cause any problems. So I think he's set his stall out, Eddie Howe, and I think this will be, certainly for the foreseeable future, the way that Newcastle play, and I think it's the way that they have to play to be able to compete now with those sides further up the table.
Absolutely, but it's been sensational, with Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall. Massive well done to them, whether they watch the channel or not. If you do, Eddie, please subscribe. But they've done an unbelievable job. And all Newcastle fans, rightly so, are giving Eddie nothing but praise. We've really enjoyed doing this video. If you do like it, please, like the video, like and subscribe. Drop us a comment. Let us know what you think about what kind of a job Eddie's done this season. Where you think we can maybe get to next season, and just make sure you tune in every Wednesday, 6:30 forevermore, and we'll be talking a lot more Newcastle United. But until then, let's keep supporting that team at Core United, and well done, Eddie Howe, and we look forward to next season and see where we can finish. Thank you very much, guys.
Take care.